Stephen sent Amy back to her dorm in Annapolis University. They were greeted by Vanessa's never-ending chatter. "See what I told you, Amy? If it's your brother-in-law, he'll definitely have a way to help you. What did he do to Mansell?" Vanessa knew that Stephen didn't have an ordinary identity, but that was the extent of her knowledge. "He broke his arm," Amy replied. Vanessa's eyes widened. Unlike everyone else at the club, she wasn't shocked to hear that. Instead, she was impressed. "You're like a hero of justice who eradicates all evil in the world." Stephen's phone rang and put a stop to her rambling. He smiled when he saw who was calling. "Are you in Annapolis?" Kim asked. "Yeah, I'm here. I'm with Amy and Vanessa at their university." "Didn't you tell me to come to the city to hear you out? Why are you fooling around at their university?" Stephen hurried to explain. "That's not it. It's because Amy was in trouble, so I came to help her. Are you staying with the Cassidy family? I'll come to find you." "Fine. I'll wait for you." "What did he say?" Urim asked, noticing the annoyance on her face. "Is he here?" "Yeah, he's in the city. He went to see my sister Amy." "What? He came all the way to Annapolis, and the first thing he does is visit his sister-in-law?" Keen said. "Why didn't he come here to see you first? I really don't know what he's thinking." While they were having a heated discussion about Stephen, he had already said goodbye to Amy and Vanessa and was on his way to the Cassidy family's residence. During his absence, Urim had taken Kim on as his adopted daughter and taken care of her and Victoria. In a sense, Urim was his benefactor. It was only right to pay him a visit and thank him for what he'd done. The Cassidy family's butler hurried into the room again. "Miss Kim, someone who's claiming to be your husband is outside. He's asking for you and Mr. Urim." Kim was surprised that Stephen had arrived so fast. Her annoyance from earlier vanished. Just as she stood up to get the door, Keen and the rest of the family walked in front of her. "I'll go out and welcome him. He's let you down so many times. He didn't even come to see you when he first came to the city. He went to see your sister. Wait for him here." "You're right," Urim said. "Go out and show him that it won't be easy to get Kim's forgiveness. He's not even taking this seriously." Keen and the family brushed past Kim despite her protests. Stephen was waiting at the entrance. Keen and a crowd of people he assumed to be the rest of the Cassidy family came out. He looked around. "Where's Kim and her adopted father?" Keen scoffed. "Do you think you're some kind of big shot? Why would the head of the Cassidy family personally come out to welcome you? You're just an illegitimate son. Do you think you're the commander-in-chief or something?" "Yes, I am. I'm the commander." Keen snickered. "You're tarnishing his name." Stephen couldn't be bothered with idle chit-chat. "Look, I'm not here for you. I'm here to see Kim." "You want to see my sister? Sure. Get on your knees." "Why?" Keen crossed his arms. "Stephen, do you have any intention of making up for what you did? When Kim needed you the most, you disappeared without a word. Everyone thought she became a widow. She confronted the Addams family on her own. Don't you feel guilty at all?" Stephen let out a sigh. "It's true that I let her down." He had his reasons, but the truth was that he wasn't with her during a difficult time. He'd made up his mind to make up for his absence. "If you want to atone for the past, get on your knees before going in." Keen was trying to force Stephen to kneel because he wanted to show him his status in the family. If Stephen refused, then he wouldn't be able to enter. The rest of the family spoke up. "Kneel and beg for forgiveness." Stephen frowned. "It's true that I've let Kim down, but this is going too far." "I'm going too far? Didn't you come to explain yourself to Kim today? If you really feel guilty, then kneel and express your sincerity. She's done a lot for you in the past, and you can't even get on your knees just this once." "Is this what Kim wants?" Stephen asked. He knew Kim better than anyone. She would never ask him to do something like this, no matter how disappointed she was. "Of course it is." Keen gestured to the inner courtyard. Kim's inside, but she didn't even come out to welcome you. Isn't it obvious? She doesn't want to see you, especially not when you can't even kneel for her. In truth, Kim was waiting for Stephen to come in. Keen and the rest of the Cassidy family resented Stephen for abandoning his family when they needed him the most. This was a rare opportunity to teach him a lesson. Unless Kim tells me herself that she wants me to kneel, I won't be getting on my knees, Stephen said. Do you even want to explain yourself to her? Keen asked him. If you know that's what I'm here for, then step aside. I'm not here to kneel to you. You're not explaining anything until you get on your knees. Looks like you're determined to stop me from entering. In that case, I'll take my leave. Stephen could force his way in, but that would be playing right into Keen's scheme. He turned around and walked away. Keen rushed to call him back. Hey, where are you going? Can't you do something as simple as kneeling? Get back here! He wouldn't know how to explain himself to Kim or Urim if Stephen really left. Keen kicked the door in frustration when Stephen didn't respond and disappeared into the distance. He could only head back in alone. Kim looked behind him when he returned. Where's Stephen? Urim was also puzzled. Why did you come back alone? Keen shook his head. I don't think he's reliable. What happened? Kim asked. When I thought about how he treated you in the past, I got angry and said a few harsh words. He got mad and started arguing with me. Then he left. Why would he leave if he's here to see me? Kim questioned Keen. He said that he came all the way to Annapolis for you, but you didn't go out to welcome him inside. There's nothing to explain to someone like you. Keen continued to mix lies with the truth, but he didn't mention anything about telling Stephen to kneel. That bastard, Urim cursed. If he ever shows up in front of me, I'll teach him a lesson of my own. He's a disgrace. That doesn't sound like something Stephen would say, Kim said. It's unfortunate, but that's the truth, Keen replied. Besides, I don't think he plans to explain himself. He could have told you in Washington, D.C. Was there really a need to come all the way to Annapolis and risk his life by visiting the Addams family? As their discussion went on, the misunderstanding deepened. After leaving the Cassidy family, Stephen went to the Addams family's residence in the suburbs. Kim hadn't come to the door, and Keen had been talking nonsense with the rest of the family. He decided that it would be in his and Kim's best interest to resolve the situation as soon as possible. Stephen was here to see what had changed in the time he'd left. It had been 6 years since he last set foot in this place. He hadn't come back ever since he was kicked out. Beaumont families were legendary existences among the upper class. Their homes were typically not located in the city. They were built in remote areas far away from the hustle and bustle. Their homes occupied a large area, and they frequently resembled palaces of ancient times. The Addams family's home was especially grand. There were rumors that the construction, location, and renovation were all meticulously planned and advanced by a world-renowned expert. The land where their home was built stretched for miles. The buildings were arranged around the hills and the mountain in the shape of a dragon. The Addams family's mansion was located at the tail, which was thought to be the dragon's core. It represented a prosperous future. Stephen stood on top of the dragon's head, looking down at the mansion. From his angle, he had a full view of the magnificent structure. Although he grew up here, this was the first time he'd observed the mansion from a distance. A voice reverberated across the hill. Who's trespassing on the Addams family's territory? The air rippled with waves of energy. The flowers and plants nearby rustled as they passed. It was headed straight for Stephen. He was impressed by the powerful aura. He turned around and came face to face with the source of the booming voice. An elderly man with long white hair stood before him. He was dressed in a gray robe that fluttered in the wind. He resembled a sage from another world. His aura seeped out of him like a raging tide. When he flicked his sleeve, a rush of wind howled over the clearing, covering the ground with a blanket of sand, leaves, and stones. Judging from the elderly man's aura, he was stronger than the left envoy of light. He walked towards Stephen. Who are you? I sense an unfamiliar aura coming from you. You're not a member of the Addams family. You're right, I'm not. Then I suggest you leave as soon as possible. This is the Addams family's territory, and it's a forbidden area. It's not just outsiders who are forbidden from entering. A majority of the family aren't allowed to come here without my permission. I'm guessing you consider the entire mountain range your family's territory? Is there a problem? The elderly man asked impatiently. In fact, there is, Stephen pointed at the mansion. Just because your family's taken up residence here doesn't mean the entire piece of land is yours. It was common for Beaumont families to occupy land in the mountains. Wherever they decided to build their property, the surrounding area would automatically become their territory. Because of their influence, no one had the courage to stop them. Whether it is or isn't is none of your concern. If you don't leave soon, then don't blame me for being rude. Stephen smiled in amusement. Upper-class families are rumored to be unreasonable and rude. You are a perfect example. These mountains don't belong to the Addams family. You can't just label them as forbidden and stop people from coming. The elderly man narrowed his eyes. Just where did you come from? Are you looking down on the Addams family? I'll give you one last warning. This is a restricted area. It's our family's territory. Leave now. The world is big, and I can wander wherever I want. This is the country's territory. As a citizen, I can come and go as I please. It's not against the law. Is that your final decision? So be it. The elderly man waved his hand. The wind picked up, guiding the blanket of stones by his feet into the air. He flicked his wrist and maneuvered them in Stephen's direction. A shower of stones rained down at high speed. Stephen rushed forward, dodging the stones as he ran up to the elderly man. In an instant, they were face to face. Stephen clenched his hand into a fist and swung. An explosion that sounded like a clap of thunder on the mountain echoed through the land. The ground beneath the Addams family's mansion shook from the aftermath. Upon impact, the elderly man flew backward and crashed into a tree nearby. He coughed up blood as he collapsed on the ground. His name was Castile Addams, a legendary figure of the Addams family. Ever since he retired from his position as the head of the family, he had been living in seclusion on the mountain and guarded the territory. Castile rarely participated in family affairs, but he was respected by all the members. He was the reason their family had maintained their position as ranked first in the country. When Terence officially took over the family, he trekked up the mountain to pay him a visit. According to the records, Castile was 150 years of age. The family considered his long life as an auspicious sign. Despite his age, his abilities were endless. He could defeat Terence with one blow. In the past, Terence had sent Johann to Castile for training. That was how he'd become known as the genius of the Addams family. Every member of the Addams family who was ranked on the combat sovereignty rankings had received personal guidance from Castile. The family saw him as a treasure who had the ability to turn stone into gold. No one from the family had ever been able to withstand a single strike from Castile, and yet the young man in front of him had taken him down in one move. You're so young, but your martial arts are incredible. This is simply inconceivable. With your foundation, you can't be an ordinary person. Can you tell me your name? The elderly man asked. You're a member of the Addams family, so it doesn't matter whether I tell you or not. You'll know who I am sooner or later. Well, I guess it doesn't make a difference at this point. I'm Stephen Addams. Stephen? Your last name is Addams. Aren't you Terence's illegitimate son? You didn't show up when the deadline for the bet came around. That's me. I didn't have a choice at that time, so I'll be returning tomorrow to fulfill my end of the bet. I came to take one last look at this place. A lot has happened, but this is where I grew up. I spent many years here. I wasn't expecting to run into you. You got in my way, so I had no choice. Castile laughed bitterly. He'd been living in seclusion for quite some time, and he rarely asked for the details regarding family affairs. But that didn't mean that he knew nothing about what was going on in the family. On the contrary, He paid close attention from a distance. He was aware of the bet between Stephen and Terence. Castile couldn't have imagined that Terence's illegitimate son would be capable of defeating him in one move. His strength had been unparalleled for decades. He was regarded as the family's trump card. During his long life, he'd rarely met a worthy opponent. Terence's illegitimate son, who had been scorned by the family and the city, had surpassed them and reached to a level far above. It was laughable that Terence had no idea. Johann was well respected among the younger generation in Annapolis, but in front of Stephen, he was insignificant and not worth mentioning. Castile himself was in the same boat as Johann. "I went easy on you," Stephen said. "That's the only reason you're still alive." Castile already knew that he'd held back. "I know." Stephen turned around. "I'm leaving. I'll come back tomorrow and settle the unfinished bet." At the Addams family's mansion, Terence and the others were having a meeting in the conference room. They were startled by the explosion and tremors. "Was it an earthquake?" Johann asked doubtfully. "Why now? There hasn't been an earthquake all this time." Terence instructed the butler to investigate. It didn't take long for him to return. "There was an explosion from the forbidden area at the back of the mountain." Terence grew worried. Could something have happened to Castile? Castile Addams was the Addams family's pillar. If anything happened to him, it would be a fatal blow to their family. Terence and Johann rushed to the top of the mountain. They found Castile leaning against a tree with his eyes closed. They hurried over in concern. "What happened? We heard a loud noise coming from the forbidden area. We were worried that something happened to you." Castile opened his eyes. "I'm fine." Terence and Johann exchanged a glance. Nothing seemed fine about this situation. "Are you really all right?" Castile's voice rose. "Are you questioning me, Terence? There's nothing for you to do here. Go back." Terence and Johann had no choice but to trek back down the mountain and return to the mansion. Things have been unusual in the city lately. First, the LeBlanc family, who claimed to be the leader of the royal families, underwent a complete change to the hierarchy because of their former successor. Then Mansell was attacked, but he refused to tell us who the culprit was. "That's not all," Johann said. "I heard that on the night he was attacked, the royal and imperial families in the city moved out at the same time and caused a huge commotion. The reason behind it is still a mystery." Terence had an ominous feeling that the city was about to change. "That's not as important as what happened to Castile. He had a fight with someone, but he's not telling us who his opponent was." The Addams family's butler received a message. "Mr. Terence, Stephen is in Annapolis, and he's announced that he'll be coming tomorrow to fulfill the bet." "He's really coming?" Johann asked in disbelief. "I have a feeling that the city has been strange lately because of Stephen. He's like a jinx. Nothing good has happened since he was born." Terence's eyes flashed. "If he wants to die so badly, then let him. I already forgot about the bet, but since he's taken the initiative and reappeared in society, he only has himself to blame. Tomorrow's date will become his death anniversary." Stephen returned to the hotel in the evening. Just as he pushed open the door, his vision blurred and he coughed up blood. His strength seemed to drain out of him. For a second, he wondered if Castile had used an underhanded method during the fight that he hadn't been aware of. But that wasn't possible. Castile's strength was apparent, but at most he was only slightly stronger than the left envoy of light. He wasn't capable of injuring him. If it wasn't Castile, then the only possibility was the poison from the left envoy of light. After it acted up that one time at the tea house, it had stayed dormant since then. The poison was colorless, odorless, and difficult to detect. It seemed like Devil Hall was determined to achieve their goal, even at the cost of the left envoy's life and the lives of hundreds of thousands of their soldiers. Stephen circulated his energy and suppressed the poison in his body. It wouldn't be easy to completely remove it from his body. Last time, the poison's effects were triggered after Derek pushed him at the tea house. This time, it was from his fight with Castile. He'd barely used a fraction of his strength, but the slight exertion had triggered the poison. Stephen's condition returned to normal after circulating his energy for a time. His recovery was fast due to his steel-like physique. If it were anyone else, they would have died from the poison a long time ago. In the evening, Stephen announced his decision to confront the Addams family tomorrow. Victoria was looking forward to it. She was worried, but Stephen was so confident that she couldn't help but trust him. "The 3 items you've asked for have arrived," Rosalind reported. "Okay, we'll take them with us tomorrow. They're my gifts to Johan." Dennis was also anticipating the confrontation tomorrow. After defeating Dimitri, the LeBlanc family was now under his leadership. His grudge of 10 years had been settled. He was looking forward to the moment Stephen would settle his own grudge with the Addams family. "Are you going to tell your wife?" Rosalind asked. "Yeah, I'll give her a call now." Stephen took out his phone and dialed Kim's number. Kim was still annoyed that Stephen had backed out of their meeting earlier today. Just when she was about to have a proper talk with him, he interrupted and said, "Kim, I'm going to the Addams family tomorrow. At that time, I'll explain everything. You have to be there." With that, he ended the call. At the Addams family's residence, Castile, who hadn't gotten involved in the family for many years, gave Terence an order. He instructed him to gather all the members of the main branch before tomorrow arrived. Terence didn't know why he was in such a rush, but he wasn't in a position to question him. His only option was to carry out his order. Castile's words were like a mandate. "I don't feel good about this," Johan said. "Strange things keep coming up. Even Castile's been acting weird. It feels like we're the only ones out of the loop." Terence's expression darkened. "A storm is coming, but our family has stood strong for thousands of years. We've survived every storm out there. Whatever's coming, we can handle it." Johan was still uneasy. "I hope so." The next morning, Stephen took Victoria and the 4 great generals to the Addams family's residence. Before leaving, he gave Kim another call to remind her to be there. "He sure is thoughtful," Urim remarked. "Me and Keen will come with you." And so, Kim, Urim, and Keen set off for the suburbs. At the Phoenix family's mansion, a butler hurried to report the news to the head of the family. "Stephen is on his way to the Addams family." "Okay, he's been in hiding for more than half a year. Now he's confronting the Addams family. We can't miss this." "He's their illegitimate son. Wouldn't we be lowering our status if we attend?" "That's where you're wrong. It doesn't matter if he's an illegitimate son. At the end of the day, he's a descendant of the Addams family. But that's not the point. Last night, Castile ordered all the members of the family to rush back. Something serious must have happened. It's not every day they run into trouble." While the members of the Phoenix family were preparing to leave, Mansell announced that he wouldn't be going. He didn't have the courage to see the commander-in-chief after what had happened at the club. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity," the head of the family said regretfully. "It's a shame, but if you're not feeling well, then you should stay home." When the Phoenix family set off, the LeBlanc, Val, Lindsay, and Naylor families were preparing to leave as well. Soon, all of the Royal, Imperial, and Beaumont families were on their way. The streets of Annapolis were filled with luxury cars that were headed in one direction, the Addams family's residence in the suburbs. Lines of cars stretched from the entrance of the mansion to tens of miles away. More than thousands of people had come to watch. With such a huge crowd, the government had no choice but to mobilize several hundred traffic police officers to maintain order. Terence was surprised to see the crowd gathering in the distance as if an extravagant gala were about to be held. "Why are there so many people here? Are they here for Stephen?" "I doubt it," Johan said. "They're most likely here to see Castile. He issued an order last night, requesting all members of the family to be present today, regardless of their rank." "That's true. How many people have returned?" "Uncle Samuel and Uncle Elric arrived at midnight. It was late, so they stayed at a hotel. They're probably on their way here." Terence had 3 brothers, Samuel, Elric, and Milo. In their youth, the four of them were at the top of the generation. Following Milo's death, they were known as the top three of their family instead of four. Samuel and Elric were ranked in the top 5 of the combat sovereignty rankings. If Milo were still around, he would have ranked in the top 3. The four of them had been taught personally by Castile. Their skills were genuine. Even the arrogant Johann spoke about them in a respectful tone. Only the commander-in-chief would be a match for them. The others around my age are also on their way back, Johann continued. The place they're coming back from is inconvenient for travel, so they'll be back later. They weren't as famous as Johann, but a few of them were stronger than him. They were ranked on the combat sovereignty rankings, which was proof of their strength. However, they kept a low profile, so the public thought of Johann as the strongest among the youth. In reality, his strength would rank him among the top 5 in the family. The reason he was chosen to become the successor was largely because he possessed the bloodlines of the Adams and Phoenix families. After all, his parents were a combination of the top 2 ranked families in the country. Johann was expected to be a genius before he was even born. Fabian and the other 4 have applied for leave from the Armored Cavalry Battalion. They're on their way back. Among the younger generation, the 5 of them were ranked the lowest, but their status had elevated ever since they were personally selected by the commander-in-chief to join the battalion. Terence nodded approvingly. It's been hundreds of years since the Adams family's been reunited like this. For me to be at the head of the family during this grand occasion will leave a mark on history. But we still don't know why Castile is gathering the family. What news could he have for us? I'm not sure either. I think it has something to do with what happened at the Forbidden Area yesterday. Perhaps it's related to my position as the head of the family. Maybe he has a family treasure to give you, Johann suggested expectantly. The more stable Terence's position was, the more secure his future would be. Terence considered it. That's very likely. Castile had reached 150 years of age. He'd had a long life. The amount of priceless treasures in his possession were too numerous to count. There were rumors that if one could obtain one of his treasures, martial arts would progress to an entirely new level. The family's butler hurried into the room. The Royal, Imperial, and Beaumont families are outside. Many others are coming as we speak. Our parking lot is full. How many people are coming? Johann asked. I can't determine the exact number, but I estimate at least 20,000 have arrived, and the number is still increasing. It's strange for so many people to be here at the same time. The Royal, Imperial, and Beaumont families make sense, but what about the other upper-class families? What are they here for? When did our status drop to the point when any random family could come and visit us? Terence waved his hand dismissively. It's rare for Castile to order everyone in the family to come back. It's normal for them to want to see us gather with their own eyes. And if he really does have something prepared for me, the more people that show up, the better. That's a good thing, but Johann had a feeling that the crowd outside wasn't here for the Adams family. They must have heard that Castile had instructed all the members to return last night, so they guessed that something serious must have happened. Castile would most likely be making a rare appearance in public. They wouldn't miss that for the world. As for the Cassidy family, their motives were clear. They were here for Kim and Stephen. Terence didn't think too much about Johann's doubts. Let's go outside and take a look. As the head, I'll have to go out and greet them. The 2 of them left the mansion and made their way to the square in front of the entrance. The Adams family's higher-ups had already arrived. The dense crowd was an unprecedented event. It was like a large-scale celebration never seen before. Terence walked in the front and introduced himself to the crowd passionately. To his surprise, aside from the Beaumont families and a few lower-ranking upper-class families, no one had a reaction. Unbeknownst to the Adams family, the Royal and Imperial families of Annapolis were here for Stephen. They had heard that he would be here to fulfill his end of the bet, so they were here to cheer him on. The families below them had limited access to information. Most of them had only heard about it through hearsay. When the Royal and Imperial families set off this morning, they naturally followed. As for what they came for, they didn't know. They only knew that they should do whatever the royal and imperial families did. None of them had returned Terrence's greeting, so they copied them and stood there, waiting for the show to begin. Terrence was somewhat embarrassed as he turned to Johann. "Is Castile here yet?" This morning, he'd asked Johann to visit Castile at the Forbidden Area to ask him for any instructions he might have. "Not yet. He told me we didn't have to wait for him. He'll appear when the time is right." Johann glanced at the crowd. He was also feeling a little embarrassed. "That means they're not here for us or Castile. There are more than 20,000 of them. Are they all here for Stephen?" Understanding dawned on Terrence. "Even if that's true, we'll deal with Stephen first and talk about the details later." He looked around, but he didn't see any sign of Stephen. The crowd seemed to have realized it too. The hushed conversations from earlier disappeared. Silence filled the air as the atmosphere became stifling. A few moments later, Urim broke the silence. "Mr. Terrence, where's your illegitimate son?" Terrence was taken aback by how direct his question was. Even if everyone was here for Stephen, the Cassidy family knew better than anyone just how powerful the Addams family was. He'd assumed that another reason they were here was to meet Castile. Why was Urim so impatient to see Stephen? "He's not here yet," Terrence replied. Urim was furious. "This is ridiculous. He asked us to come, but he's nowhere to be found. He must have fooled us." Keen clenched his fists. "If I see him again, I'll skin him alive." The more Terrence thought about it, the more he felt like something was amiss. None of them were here for the Addams family. "Mr. Urim, what's going on?" "When Stephen came back, he told us that he would explain himself to Kim," Urim explained. "But in order to do that, we would have to show up here today. We're here, but there's no sign of him." Terrence chuckled. "So that's how it is. I believe you've been fooled. If he was planning to fulfill the bet in the first place, he would have shown up months ago, instead of making his wife take his place. It's not wise to trust someone like him. The moment he sets foot on our territory, that is, if he does come, we'll dispose of him immediately." "That's none of our concern," Urim said. "If he doesn't show up, we're leaving." At that moment, a wave of restlessness passed over the guests. The dense crowd parted and made way for the new arrival. "Stephen's here!" someone shouted. Everyone turned to the road. Stephen was all smiles as he walked along. His mother, Victoria, was next to him. Compared to his relaxed attitude, she was visibly nervous. Their attention shifted when a shocking scene appeared behind Stephen and Victoria. Jaden was carrying a black coffin on his shoulder. Dennis, Roslyn, and Zachary were holding a memorial tablet, wreath, and urn, respectively. 2 words had been engraved on the memorial tablet: Johann Addams. Johann's expression changed when he saw the memorial tablet. He remembered giving Stephen the memorial tablet, wreath, and urn during his wedding. He hadn't expected him to keep them, let alone bring them here today. Stephen had also brought along an extra gift, a coffin. The crowd was stunned. Bringing a coffin, memorial tablet, wreath, and an urn to the Addams family's residence was a clear provocation. Johann clenched his fists. His eyes burned with anger. Terrence was more composed, but the cracks in his tense expression gave him away. He'd assumed that Stephen was here to give in, but judging from the situation, it was obvious that that thought had never crossed his mind. Even Urim and Keen were shocked. Provoking the #1 family in the country was the same as asking for death. The Cassidy family may be ranked 3rd, but they would never attempt something like this. Kim gave the 4 items a thoughtful look. It was a blatant provocation. That alone was proof that his disappearance more than half a year ago wasn't because he was afraid of the Addams family. As more than 20,000 gazes fell on Stephen, the pressure shifted to the Addams family. If Terrence didn't handle this properly, their family's reputation would be tarnished. Terrence let out a laugh when Stephen walked up to them. I never thought that you'd show up in front of our house after missing the bet's deadline. Are you here to pay off your debt? No, you're the one who has a debt to repay. What debt? Stephen ignored him and turned to Victoria. Mom, do you still remember my promise? I said I would bring you to the Addams family and make Terrence regret abandoning us. Victoria nodded. She didn't know how, but standing here today, she had a feeling that his promise would be fulfilled. On the other hand, Terrence wasn't pleased to have his dark history being announced in front of so many people. Stephen didn't care. He scanned the crowd for the Cassidy family. He found Kim standing next to Urim and Keen. Kim, besides getting justice for Mom, I'm here to explain myself to you. Kim met his gaze. There was confidence and determination in his eyes. She gave him a nod. Stephen addressed the crowd. Unlike Terrence, I would never abandon my family in exchange for wealth and glory. He didn't wait for Terrence to respond before continuing. I'm here to fulfill my end of the bet. I'll show everyone that the Addams family is not as powerful and immovable as they say they are. Johann scoffed. Stephen, in front of the Addams family, even bragging has its consequences. The higher-ups of the family agreed. They were ranked first in the country, and they had maintained their position for thousands of years after generations of hard work. A young man in his 20s would be no match for them. Do you really think that's possible? Terrence said. His tone was mocking. Well, I suppose there is a possibility, but the chances of that happening are much too low. You won't be able to defeat us unless you're the commander-in-chief. His remarks were met with strange reactions from the royal and imperial families that he couldn't quite understand. None of that means anything, Stephen said. We'll know after we fight. Terrence's eyes flashed coldly. If you want to die so badly, then I'll grant your wish. Nothing is more satisfying than watching an insect challenge a god, only to end up being crushed beneath their heel. Victoria, I'd like you to see just what kind of divine ability your son has. Terrence glanced at the Addams family, who were standing behind him. Initially, I planned to have our family's gatekeeper, Fabian, fight you, Stephen, but he's still on his way. I've decided to lower the difficulty and send Lenny instead. He's slightly weaker than Fabian, but there's not much of a difference. If you can defeat him, you'll have the qualifications to join our family. Lenny, come forward. A young man stepped out, and the crowd dissolved into discussion. As expected of the Addams family, even their youths below the gatekeeper are skilled. It'll be easier for him to rank in the top 5 youths of the city. The #1 family in the country never disappoints. Their title isn't just for show. Lenny, you are to accept Stephen's challenge, Terrence instructed. Your task is to kill him. If you fail, then he'll be the one to kill you. Understood. Lenny walked straight to Stephen and threw a fierce punch. Several people in the crowd gasped. Lenny's attack was stronger than they'd expected. Derek, who was technically ranked first among the youths, had a feeling that he was no match for him. The rankings excluded those from Beaumont families, but that didn't mean they were weak. Any one of them had the skills to top the charts. The Addams family looked on in amusement. Stephen was about to suffer the strength of their family. However, Stephen stood there and shook his head in disappointment. Too slow. Just as Lenny's fist was about to make contact, Stephen threw out his palm. Upon collision, a cloud of dust spewed into the air. Lenny was sent flying across the clearing, like a kite with a broken string. He crashed into the pillar and collapsed on the ground. The onlookers were astonished, more specifically the Addams family, the Beaumont families, and the lower-ranking families. Was this really the same illegitimate son they'd looked down on all this time? Stephen's martial arts were incredibly profound. He had taken a member of the Addams family down with a single palm strike. With his skill, he would be placed above all the other youths in the city. Many people looked at Tien. They now understood why the youth who had previously ranked second couldn't defeat Stephen. Urim and Keen exchanged a glance but said nothing. A senior member of the Addams family said, "Stephen is more capable than we thought." Terrence's expression grew dark. "Let's stop wasting time," Stephen said. "Send out your strongest fighter. I'm in a hurry." His words were like a slap to the Addams family's faces. A young man came forward. "I'm Wade Addams. I'll be your opponent." Terrence gave him a nod. Among the family's younger generation, Wade was one of the most talented and hardworking members. He was the prime example of genius and diligence. He was ranked in the top 5 of the youths in the family. Wade let out a battle cry before charging at Stephen. He was fast, but to the other youths ranked at the top in the city, like Tien and Derek, his movements were much too slow. If it was too slow to them, then it must have been a slow-motion movie to Stephen. Stephen effortlessly grabbed his wrist and snapped it. Wade cried out in pain and disbelief. "I told you to send out the strongest person," Stephen said indifferently. Another young man walked up. "I'll fight you." He was ranked 4th among the younger generation in the Addams family. Judging from Stephen's strength, it wouldn't be a disgrace to lose to him. Stephen beckoned him to attack. "You're not enough." The youth flew into a rage and rushed towards him. Stephen put a stop to his momentum with a slap to his face. After that, the youth ranked 3rd in the family stepped forward. He lost with 1 strike from Stephen. Next, the youths ranked 2nd and 1st came out, one after another. Neither of them could withstand a single blow. The higher-ups of the Addams family were stunned. Terrence's expression was grim, but he didn't say a word. Stephen observed the remaining youths. "Is that it? If you're not brave enough to challenge me alone, then come at me together. I don't have time for small fries." His words got them riled up. Every member of the younger generation, except Johan, rushed forward and surrounded Stephen. "Attack together!" someone shouted. "Today, either he dies or we die." More than 20 youths made their move. Stephen reacted at a blinding speed and landed a punch on each of them, sending them crashing to the ground a distance away. The Beaumont families noticed that something wasn't right. They whispered amongst themselves. "Isn't he too strong? He took down all the youths in the family by himself." The shock had even crept into Terrence's expression. Johan clenched his fist as he analyzed who would win if he and Stephen fought. Kim was the most surprised out of everyone present. She'd been with Stephen for so many years, but she had no idea that he was skilled in martial arts. Valeria, who was in her arms, started giggling. She mumbled a string of words that sounded like daddy and winner. The higher-ups looked at Terrence with questioning gazes. Stephen was strong enough to defeat all the youths in their family except for Johan. His skills were comparable to those listed on the combat sovereignty rankings. If Terrence had discovered his capabilities sooner and accepted him, they wouldn't be suffering this humiliation in front of all the upper-class families in Annapolis. Terrence was feeling immense pressure from the sharp gazes that bore into his back. Since when did Stephen get so strong? What had he missed for the situation to have gotten to this point? If Stephen were still with them, his strength would be enough to make the entire family think highly of him. And together with Johan, who is reported to have the purest bloodline, the Addams family would have been stabilized for at least 100 more years. Terrence had only just discovered Stephen's true strength, but it wasn't too late. He spoke up when another member of the family was preparing to fight. "Stephen, it seems like I've underestimated you. Your skills have met the requirements to join the Addams family. As long as you agree, I'll welcome you home and hold a grand ceremony for you." Stephen responded with a laugh. If he wasn't strong enough to defeat the younger generation in a matter of minutes, he would have been killed a long time ago. When Stephen didn't reply, Terrence continued. "Do you have any other requests? I guarantee that after you return to my family, you'll have the same status as Johan. I'll officially acknowledge you as my son. You may also use our family's resources as you wish. They're of high quality, so your progress will be even faster." Terrence looked up at the higher-ups for their opinion. "Everyone, what do you think?" All of them nodded in agreement. From what they saw of Stephen's skills, he didn't seem to be weaker than Johann. He might even be stronger than him. Stephen was only an illegitimate child, but he still had their blood. He was qualified to be one of them again. Victoria was thrilled with Stephen's performance. Her son had just obtained the unanimous recognition of the entire Addams family. As for Kim, she finally understood why Stephen had been nonchalant whenever she'd asked him about his preparations for the bet. He'd always told her that it wasn't a big deal, and it really wasn't. He'd never been afraid of the Addams family, and he had good reason for it. He was strong enough to take down the younger generation in one move. Urim let out a sigh. I never would have seen this coming. He's been criticized across the country for more than half a year. The disgrace of men everywhere is actually this strong. I finally understand why Derek wanted to cancel the engagement. Stephen is a suitable partner for Kim. If Stephen returns to the Addams family, they'll become our in-laws, Keen whispered. Our family will be on par with the Phoenix family. You're right, Urim said with a smile. The two of them discussed it as if it was a given that Stephen would accept Terrence's offer. And it wasn't just them. The other Beaumont families and the lower-ranking families thought the same. If Stephen joined the Addams family, he would receive an endless supply of resources. His progression was a guarantee. That would be a perfect end to their bet. But their expectations were shattered when Stephen spoke. Why? You've disapproved of me for so many years, and now you want to be my father? First, you should ask yourself this. Do you deserve to be a father? Terrence fell silent. When he thought about it, it was true that he'd ignored Stephen ever since he was born. Just as he was about to smooth things over, Stephen continued, as if he had predicted what he was about to say. You still want to acknowledge me? In my eyes, the Addams family is as tiny as a speck of dust. What right do you have to acknowledge me? I'm not looking down on you, but it's the truth that I can ruin your family with just one hand. The higher-ups weren't pleased to hear that. They couldn't remember the last time they'd been belittled like this. Don't cross the line, Terrence warned. You may be skilled, but you shouldn't get ahead of yourself. There are many others in the family who are much stronger than the opponents you've faced. I've chosen to accept you because I value potential. Stephen gave him an unimpressed look. So now it's, I value potential and not I acknowledge you as my son? What a hypocrite! Terrence frowned. Watch what you say. Do you really think we'll sit back and listen to you talk down to us? Cut the nonsense. Send out your strongest member. An amused laugh sounded behind Terrence. Johann walked out and stood in front of Stephen. I'll be honest, your strength surprised me, but that doesn't mean you can look down on our family. Dad, I'll fight him. The higher-ups were instantly energized. Stephen may have defeated the rest of the younger generation in one strike, but Johann, who was famous for being the face of the family, had yet to make his move. He possessed the purest and noblest of bloodlines. No one could match up to him. Johann had also gone through Castile's grueling personal training. His strength had reached the peak of the younger generation. You're strong, Stephen, Terrence said. But you're not strong enough to take us down. No one has the right to look down on our family. In the past, Johann had made a comeback after being diagnosed and bedridden with the terminal illness. He rose up the ranks and made a name for himself among the younger generation of the Addams family. And not too long ago, he was officially recognized as the successor. Terrence attributed his talent and success to a direct result of his noble bloodline. No one could compare to him. Stephen had defeated the rest of the youths, but he was no match for Johann. Because whatever he could accomplish, Johann could do the same. The successor of the Addams family is finally making his move, Urim murmured. The stars can't compete with the moon, someone said. Looks like this is it for the illegitimate son. Laurel held her head high at the praises for Johann. Victoria, I bet you're proud of your son's performance, but he can't be compared to Johann. It's impossible for your son to win. We'll know who's stronger after the fight, Victoria said. Laurel lost interest in mocking her when she didn't have a reaction. Then let's wait and see. Stephen gestured to the memorial tablet, wreath, and urn that Dennis, Rosalind, and Zachary were holding. Remember these? They're the gifts you gave me on my wedding day. I'll return them to you today. He pointed to the coffin next to Jaden. And this is a precious coffin that I had asked someone to make for you. I believe it'll come in handy today. Johann gritted his teeth. Stephen never failed to provoke him every time they met. Since you want to die so badly, I'll give you a one-way ticket to hell. Johann took a step forward. In an instant, cracks spread out across the square. The ground trembled as his aura swept over the area. He released a powerful wave of energy that caused the spectators near him to retreat further away. His aura is terrifying, someone called out. Isn't this the inner energy of someone who's about to become the Grand Master? Martial arts experts were divided into realms. Grandmasters were the most skilled, and they had the authority to establish their own sect. In contemporary times, Grandmasters were extremely rare, including those who were close to reaching that realm. 6 years ago, the Alliance had succeeded in putting pressure on the United States, even though they had the martial arts experts like Kylan, because they'd managed to recruit 20 Grandmasters on their side. Only 20 could be found across the 40 Alliance countries. That was how rare they were. And those 20 valuable Grandmasters met a tragic end. All of them were killed in a decisive battle with Stephen. After that, the Alliance suffered heavy losses, which ended in their defeat. In the United States, only Grandmasters could be ranked on the combat sovereignty rankings. Johann was young, but he was already close to reaching that realm. His talent was apparent, even though part of it was due to Castiel's training. Interesting, Stephen mused with a grin. Johann charged at him without warning. Each punch released waves of energy that cut through the air. The ground cracked wherever he stepped. Johann leapt into the air and locked eyes with Stephen for a brief moment before throwing himself at him. The crowd could feel the intensity of his aura. As expected of someone who's almost a Grand Master, someone said. His punches are so powerful that they can probably shake a mountain. I've been a martial arts expert for years, another person added. But even I wouldn't be able to withstand a blow from Johann. While they were discussing, Johann had already closed in on Stephen. His fists were mere inches away from his head. Victoria and Kim's hearts lurched. Stephen was still standing calmly in the same spot. He was expressionless and didn't have the slightest trace of fear. From the perspective of the spectators, Johann's thunderous strike had scared Stephen silly, to the point where he was frozen in place. Johann sped up when he was a split second from making contact. Die, Stephen. His fist connected with Stephen's head. Or so he thought. Johann felt like he was in a trance. Stephen hadn't moved from where he was standing. He had leaned back to avoid his attack. How was that possible? Johann was confident in his speed. When he aimed his attack, he didn't believe that Stephen would have the ability to dodge. But at the last possible moment, Stephen had leaned slightly backward, avoiding a fatal blow to his vitals. In this position, Johann's attack would hit his right shoulder instead. But that didn't matter. He would still be able to cause him serious injury. Johann's fist made contact with Stephen's right shoulder, and an explosive sound reverberated across the square. A shockwave from the impact swept over the crowd. Broken pieces of rubble were sent flying in all directions. A few of the onlookers with no training in martial arts were killed on the spot. Urim and Kim instructed their subordinates to cover Kim. Victoria was safe because the 4 great generals were protecting her. The head of the Val family sucked in a breath. Is this the power of a partial Grand Master? He was currently a Grand Master himself, but before he'd reached this realm, he wouldn't have been able to output this much power. As expected of the purest bloodline, Celeste's father said. At the center of the square, Stephen and Johann had vanished in a cloud of smoke and dust. As the dust settled, Stephen's body came into view. He was half sunken into the ground. Laurel's laughter rang out. I already said it before. An illegitimate son is no match for Johan. He couldn't even take a single hit. The higher-ups of the Addams family were delighted, while Victoria and Kim were worried. Stephen's voice sounded from the center of the square. Who said I'm dead? He leapt out of the ground and landed on his feet. Victoria and Kim were relieved to see that he was okay. Stephen patted the dust from his clothes. Is that all the successor is capable of? I barely felt a thing. Are you all right? Johan asked in surprise. Stephen spread out his hands with a smile. Yeah, I'm fine. What did you think was going to happen? The higher-ups of the Addams family looked at each other in dismay. Judging from the impact of Johan's attack, he had put all of his strength into it. Not only had Stephen survived, but he also didn't have a scratch. This put Laurel in an awkward position because she'd claimed that Stephen wouldn't be able to withstand a single blow. She glanced at Terrence, who met her gaze. Both of them were thinking the same thing. How had Stephen managed to survive an all-out attack from Johan? Even if he didn't die, it didn't make sense for him to be unharmed. Johan was too dumbfounded to react. He stared at Stephen in utter disbelief. Are you surprised? You've looked down on me for the past 2 decades and treated me like trash. But the ones who are truly worthless are you and your family. None of you would be able to survive a real fight. Stephen wasn't bragging. What he said was the truth. 6 years ago, the 20 Grandmasters from the Alliance's side could have killed someone like Johan in an instant. Devil Hall's army was even stronger. Are you done? If you are, then it's my turn. Stephen swung his fist at a blinding speed. Johan, what are you doing? Terrence shouted. Block his attack! Stephen's attack had broken through the sound barrier. An ear-piercing sound swept over the onlookers. Even the head of the Beaumont family, like Urim, had to cover his ears. Those who were closer to Stephen, especially the ones with a weak foundation in martial arts, bled from their ears. Johan snapped out of it from Terrence's warning, but there was no time to dodge. Stephen was too fast. He received a heavy blow to the chest, sending him flying more than 30 feet away. Terrence and Laurel's eyes widened. Stephen had seriously injured Johan with a single strike. What kind of strength does he possess? Urim said in astonishment. He even defeated the successor in one move. It seems like he's reached the Grandmaster realm, Keen said. Grandmaster? But isn't he a little too young? He's not even 30 yet. Aside from Terrence, who was half a tier higher, most of the other leaders of Beaumont families had reached the Grandmaster realm. Stephen had been able to achieve what they had spent decades for at such a young age. Kim was listening to their conversation from the side. She didn't know much about martial arts or Grandmasters, but she could tell that Urim and Keen had a certain level of respect for Stephen after witnessing his battle against Johan. In other words, Stephen was many times stronger than Johan. Victoria, who was standing next to the 4 great generals, shot Laurel a triumphant look. Just like Urim and Keen, the crowd was shocked when Johan collapsed. Laurel didn't care about Victoria at this point. Terrence, you know just as well as I do that Johan can't lose. I know. Johan was the successor of the family, and he was famous for his extraordinary talent. The future of the family was riding on his shoulders. Ever since he became a martial artist, he hadn't lost a single battle. That was Terrence's greatest pride in his son. If Johan lost to his illegitimate son in front of so many people, their family would face the greatest humiliation of all history. You have to do something, Laurel urged. Calm down. Johan won't lose. Terrence walked over to Johan and crouched down. He slipped a white pill into his mouth and signaled to the higher-ups of the family. He didn't want them to come over before pressing his palm to Johan's back. The higher-ups realized what Terrence intended to do. He wanted them to transfer their inner energy to Johan. They hurried over and joined him in transferring their own energy. The Addams family would be finished if Johan lost here. It wasn't long before Johan looked refreshed. The wounds on his body healed in an instant, and he was once again full of energy. There was a steady thrum of energy in his body, and it felt like 2 meridians had been opened up within him. He felt transformed and reborn. The inner energy from Terrence and the other higher-ups had merged with Johan's body. His strength had reached the next realm. He could make the wind blow with a wave of his hand. One particularly sharp-eyed family head noticed the changes that Johan had undergone. This is the Grand Master's realm? He was half a step away just now, and he suffered serious injuries. He advanced to the next realm in a matter of minutes. No wonder they're the #1 family in the country. Their heritage runs deep. Being half a step away from the Grand Master realm was more complex than it sounded. It took a great deal of effort to break through to the next realm. Aside from hard work, the right moment was required. Both were just as important. Neither could be excluded. After all, Grandmasters were rare to come by. Johan could feel the energy surging within him. His strength had increased over 100-fold. You didn't expect this, did you, Stephen? Your attack didn't kill me. It made me stronger. The air rippled around his booming voice as it echoed across the area. Many of the onlookers winced from the sound, feeling as if their eardrums had been shattered. Urim expressed his dissatisfaction. This is preposterous. Does the Addams family have no shame? Terrence had slipped a pill into Johan's mouth. Everyone present had seen the whole process. They didn't know what the pill was, but with their wealth, they wouldn't be surprised if it was a miracle pill that could heal and recover. This was evident when Johan's wounds vanished. Terrence and the other higher-ups had transferred their inner energy to Johan. That was equivalent to Johan possessing the strength of the entire Addams family. Another family head took over the conversation. What can you do even if they're cheating? They've always used all kinds of underhanded methods to win. Besides, Johan is the successor and the face of the family. He can't lose to an illegitimate son. His sour tone spoke volumes of his disapproval. Someone else chimed in. Johan's loss is equivalent to the Addams family's loss. Terrence would never let that happen. Are we just going to watch? Urim said angrily. Stephen's performance had impressed him and won his approval. Even if you don't want to watch, this is the Addams family we're talking about. We can't interfere with an illegitimate son. No matter how underhanded their tactics are, this is their family. We're not qualified to interfere. Urim frowned. The 2 family heads were right. It was true that outsiders were not allowed to interfere with the Addams family's internal matters. Kim grew increasingly worried after listening to their conversation. Johan had gained the upper hand. He was only one person, but fighting him was the same as going against the entire upper management of the Addams family. Keen patted Kim's shoulder. There's nothing we can do. His life is in the hands of fate. The other family heads voiced the regret. I have to say, Stephen is the strongest among the younger generation across the country. It's a pity that he decided to challenge the Addams family. I've never seen a genius like him. It's unfortunate that I'm forced to watch him die with my own eyes. None of them wanted a martial arts genius like Stephen to fall, but they had no choice but to watch. They couldn't go against the Addams and Phoenix families. More importantly, Johan had reached the Grand Master realm. He had the authority to establish his own sect. To kill a Grand Master required thousands of forces. Terrence shot Stephen a gratified look. My grandson is a Grand Master. Are you still confident in winning? Wipe the floor with him, Laurel clamored. You have to make him understand the gap between you two. Johan nodded. Mom, Dad, just watch me. Waves of energy emanated from him as he walked towards Stephen. The air became oppressive. The onlookers who were closest felt like a mountain was pressing on their chests with every step he took. Do you think I lost, Stephen? I admit that you're skilled, but this ends here. Prepare yourself. Johan waved his hand. A rush of wind howled over him and kicked up sand and stone. The crowd felt like they were witnessing the eye of the storm. Johan possessed a destructive strength that could destroy the heavens and extinguish the earth. Stephen stood there calmly. He didn't move. I told you, you can't win against me. You cheated, but it doesn't make a difference. Is that so? Johan said through clenched teeth. Let's see if you can survive this. He threw out his fist. Stephen faced his attack head-on with a punch of his own. Their fists collided, and a stronger shockwave swept over the crowd. Those who couldn't retreat in time were directly hit. They fell over with blood flowing from their eyes, nose, and mouth. A large crater had formed beneath Johann and Stephen. A shower of stones fell around them as the ground trembled. Johann was the first to falter. Stephen's fist pushed past his and sent him flying once more. He crashed onto the ground a short distance away. The crowd couldn't believe their eyes. Thousands of troops were needed to take down a Grand Master, but Stephen had accomplished that by himself. His realm was beyond their imagination. Johann wiped the blood from his mouth, glaring at Stephen. How? How did you defeat me in one move? I'm a Grand Master. A Grand Master isn't invincible, Stephen said. No, I can't lose. I'll never lose to you. Johann gathered all his remaining strength and tried to stand. Stephen closed the distance between them in an instant and grabbed his throat. It's over. Since the day you showed up at my wedding with the memorial tablet, wreath, and urn, your ending has already been decided. This is the end for you. Go to hell. Stephen lifted Johann up and landed 3 hits in quick succession. He released his grip, and Johann dropped to the ground limply. Johann! Terence shouted. Laurel burst into tears. Urim's eyes flashed. Even a Grand Master isn't a match for him. Kim was in disbelief. Was that really her husband? Stephen had repeatedly dismissed her concerns about the bet or any situation that involved conflict. Johann represented the entire Addams family, and he had single-handedly taken him down. His casual and confident attitude wasn't just for show. He had the strength to back it up. Under the watchful gazes of the crowd, Stephen asked the 4 great generals to bring everything over. Jaden took the lead. He lifted the coffin that was much larger than him and carried it to the center of the square. Stephen kicked open the lid, placed Johann's body inside, and closed it. Rosalind came over and handed the memorial tablet to Stephen. He nudged the coffin into one of the numerous pits on the ground. With a wave of his hand, he swept up a blanket of gravel and covered the coffin. Then, he placed Johann's memorial tablet on top of the grave. It was done in one smooth motion. Stephen turned to Terence and Laurel. I've arranged your son's grave in your stead. Less work for you. Terence didn't say anything, but the look on his face was menacing. Tears ran down Laurel's face. You bastard! Return my son to me! The higher-ups shrank back, not knowing what to do. Stephen's actions were a direct challenge to the Addams family. Johann was the successor, and he would have preserved the prosperity of the family for the next 100 years. They had high expectations for him. And Stephen had single-handedly crushed their hopes. The head of the Phoenix family's face twisted in anger. This is unforgivable. Johann was just as valuable to the Phoenix family as he was to the Addams family. Mansell was the favorite of both families, but they couldn't deny that he had wasted his days and did nothing substantial. His talent was mediocre and limited. They couldn't rely on him, especially not after the entire city found out that a mysterious culprit whose identity was still unknown had broken his arm. The Phoenix family needed Johann to revive their family, but now he was dead. He has to die today, Terence said coldly. Following the head of the Addams and Phoenix family's instruction, countless martial arts experts rushed out of the square. As the head of the family ranked 3rd in the country, Urim was able to recognize their realm faster than anyone else. They were all Grand Masters. He counted their numbers. There were 100 of them. 6 years ago, the Alliance had only found 20 Grand Masters across their 40 countries. It was a well-known fact that they were rare, but the Addams and Phoenix families had managed to get 100 Grand Masters on their side. This was an incredible feat that only the top 2 families were capable of. Grand Masters were exceptional. They had a longer lifespan than ordinary martial artists. For example, One Grandmaster in the country had established a sect when he advanced to this realm. He'd been alive for 130 years. The 100 Grandmasters on the Addams and Phoenix family sides were more than 70 years of age, but they looked as if they were in their prime. "Did you think we didn't have anyone else?" Terrence asked. "Did you think I wouldn't kill you just because you're skilled? Or is it because you have nothing to fear?" He assumed that Stephen was bold enough to kill Johann because he wanted to take over the successor position. "Talking to him is a waste of time," the head of the Phoenix family said. He motioned for the 100 Grandmasters to get ready. Stephen assessed their numbers with a smile. He was reminded of the battle 6 years ago when he was surrounded by the 20 Grandmasters from the Alliance. He was in the same situation now, except there were 70 additional opponents. Several family heads shook their heads and sighed. "Stephen's strong, but he won't be able to come out of this alive. Even if he's killed, he'll become a legend after death. Having 100 Grandmasters as his opponents is unprecedented." The 4 great generals were worried as well. "Mr. Adams, let me fight with you," Zachary said. Dennis, Roslyn, and Jaden also requested to join. "No, this is between me and the Adams family. If you step in, they'll think it's unfair. It's just 100 Grandmasters. That's nothing to me." Stephen had made his decision, so the 4 great generals could only watch from the sidelines. Stephen faced the Grandmasters and made a show of counting them one by one. "As expected of the top 2 families in the country, you've managed to gather 100 Grandmasters." "Are you afraid?" Terrence said. "If you plead for me to spare you, then I might consider leaving your corpse intact." Stephen laughed. "You've always been overly confident in your family. 100 of them aren't enough to scare me. If you have anyone else on your side, now's the time to bring them out. All of you should attack together." The Addams and Phoenix families were furious. He was talking big despite being surrounded. Just how much did he look down on them? "All right, if that's what you want, but only if you survive." Terrence raised his hand and shouted, "Attack him together!" 100 Grandmasters charged at Stephen from all directions. The crowd focused on the center of the square. They were afraid that they would miss the battle if they blinked. Grandmasters were a rare existence, and 100 of them ganging up on one person was unheard of. Even if Stephen was killed, it would be a glorious defeat. It would be worth bragging about after his death. Stephen felt like he'd returned to the battlefield from the past. 6 years ago, he was surrounded just like this. Any battle that involved a Grandmaster would no doubt shake the heavens and earth and shift the winds and clouds. Kim prayed for Stephen to make it out alive. She couldn't even see him anymore. The Grandmasters had closed in on him. Urim patted her shoulder to reassure her, but he didn't say a word. He didn't think Stephen would survive. Even Tien and Celeste, who had always thought highly of Stephen, had solemn expressions. No one had expected the Addams and Phoenix families to have this many Grandmasters on their side. There was a saying among those who walked the part of a martial artist. Those below the Grandmaster realm were equivalent to insects. Stephen might be able to deal with 1 or 2 of them, but could he really defeat 100 of them? 1 minute later, surprised gasps sounded from the crowd. One of the Grandmasters was flung across the square. Then, a second Grandmaster was piled on top of the first. In a few moments, 100 were thrown out. Stephen was the only one left standing at the center. His clothes were stained with splatters of blood. They belonged to the Grandmasters. He took them all down? Urim stuttered. "I can only say that he's terrifying," the head of the Lindsay family said. The other family heads were just as shocked, but that was an understatement. Just how powerful is he? He fought 100 Grandmasters by himself and won. Who else in the country would be capable of that? The higher-ups of the Addams family started panicking. If even 100 Grandmasters weren't a match for him, then who else did they have? Terrence was also having a hard time accepting it. He couldn't admit defeat. "Stephen, do you think you've won? We haven't lost yet." He waved the butler over. "Are Samuel and Elric here yet?" Terrence, Samuel, Elric, and Milo used to be called the top 4 of the Addams family. After Milo's death, they were only known as the top 3. No one in the country could defeat them if they joined forces. Many years had passed, and the 3 of them had only grown stronger. Even though Milo wasn't here anymore, their combined strength was as powerful as if they were a group of 4. "They're at the hotel," the butler explained. "Both of them are among the top 5 on the combat sovereignty rankings, and they hold important positions in the army. They had to take care of military matters in the morning. That's why they're late." "All right, tell them to hurry back as soon as possible. Today is the life or death of the Addams family." "Understood." The butler left to contact Samuel and Elric. Terrence glanced at Johan's makeshift grave and the bodies of the Grand Masters before shifting his gaze to Stephen. His illegitimate son, who'd he'd been looking down on since he was born, possessed unimaginable power. Even Johan, whom he'd strongly advocated for, wouldn't have been able to survive a battle with 100 Grand Masters. But Stephen had done it. He'd won without a single scratch on him. It wasn't just the other families in the crowd. This was also the first time the Addams family, who constantly bragged about their long history, had witnessed such a scene. It made their hair stand on end. Was this really Terrence's son? If he hadn't abandoned Stephen 6 years ago and treated him and Johan as equals, the Addams family would have been more powerful than ever. Johan could have maintained their family's prosperity for the next 100 years, but if Stephen was in the picture, he would have secured their position in the country for much longer. They might have even been able to expand overseas. However, that was a long-lost opportunity. Given the current circumstances, Terrence couldn't give in to Stephen. Their Addams family would be ruined if they admitted defeat. "Go to the forbidden area and bring Castile here," Terrence instructed an attendant. The crowd was once again filled with anticipation. Castile, who'd been living in seclusion in the mountains and overseeing the Addams family from a distance, was finally going to make his appearance. There were rumors that he was over 150 years of age and that he'd reached the Grandmaster realm a long time ago. He would never show himself in public unless the fate of the Addams family was on the line. It was Castile who had ordered all the members of the family to return today. Samuel and Elric had yet to arrive, so Terrence could only ask the pillar of the family to come forward. Several attendants escorted an elderly man with white hair to the square in front of the mansion. He was the pillar of the Addams family, Castile Addams. He was more than 150 years of age, but there were barely any signs of aging aside from his white hair. Terrence, the higher-ups, and the rest of the family greeted him respectfully. The Addams family had more than 1,000 members. To have so many people lowering their heads to pay respect was a spectacular scene. One of the higher-ups led the conversation. "Terrence's illegitimate son came here to wreak havoc. He's disrespected his elders and injured many of our members. He's even killed the successor, Johan, whom you personally trained. What's more, he refuses to acknowledge his identity as a member of the family. He's devoid of conscience and beyond redemption." The other higher-ups joined in and began criticizing Stephen. "Please deliver justice on behalf of the Addams family and punish him," Terrence said. "He has no respect for his elders." Castile was shocked by the news. Stephen had taken down the entire Addams family. His spiraling emotions triggered the injury he'd sustained yesterday. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief to wipe his mouth. The Addams family fell into a state of panic when they saw the blood on his handkerchief. "Castile, are you injured?" Terrence asked carefully. The Grandmaster realm was further divided into subsequent tiers. Castile had long since reached this realm. He was currently in the Martial Grandmaster realm. Martial Grandmasters were 1 in 10,000. Those who reached this realm would have their lifespan extended by at least 200 years. They were known as the pinnacle of martial arts. They were said to be invincible against tens of thousands of people. It would be a simple feat for them to destroy a country. Some referred to martial grandmasters as immortals. One who reached the peak of martial arts could ascend and move beyond the limitations of humans. Who could have injured a martial grandmaster like Castile? Yes, I was injured yesterday, Castile said. Terence thought back to the explosion yesterday at the forbidden area and Castile's evasive attitude. He must have fought with someone who was stronger than him. Who was it? Everyone knows who he is. Castile's gaze swept over the crowd before landing on one person. Everyone followed his line of sight. He was looking at Stephen. It's him? How is that possible? Stephen was the one who injured Castile? Castile coughed into his handkerchief before continuing. There's no mistake. He and I fought yesterday in the forbidden area. The reason I ordered the family to come back was because of him. Among the descendants of the Addams family, he's a rare genius who appears once every 1,000 years. He paused and scanned the area. He could tell what had happened with one glance at the ruined square and the request to seek justice for the family. What a pity. The Addams family had made an enemy out of Stephen. Terence finally understood the reason why Castile had ordered him to gather the family. It wasn't because of him. It was because of Stephen. He was so strong that even Castile couldn't beat him. Terence let out a self-deprecating laugh. His martial arts has reached this level, but I only had the younger generation compete with him. The heads of the Beaumont family sighed. Even Castile had been defeated. Who else did they have? It seemed like the Addams family was destined to be ruined today. Terence, a wise man sees the situation for what it is, Castile said. We've lost. Terence ignored him and went into a frenzy. No, our family hasn't lost yet. We'll never lose. Please give me one last chance. Everyone thought he'd lost his mind. Even Castile had already admitted defeat. It was useless to continue. Me and my two brothers are the top 3 members of our family. We are unstoppable if we join forces. And they're ranked in the top 5 of the combat sovereignty rankings. Terence turned to the butler. Are Samuel and Elric here yet? Before he could reply, Samuel and Elric announced their arrival. They had heard from the butler that someone had challenged the Addams family and that Johann had died in battle. They had set aside their military affairs and rushed back home in anger. We are ranked first in the country. How can we lose to an illegitimate son? Samuel demanded. Perhaps it was because he'd been serving in the army for a long time, but he had an imposing demeanor befitting of a superior. It's impossible for us to fall, Elric added. You two are finally here, Terence said expectantly. If the 3 of them joined forces, their strength would be just below Castile's. Samuel ignored everyone present and went straight to Terence. Where's your illegitimate son? Us 3 can take him on. Terence gestured to Stephen, who was standing a short distance away. That's him. How dare you provoke the Addams family, Samuel said as he turned to face Terence's illegitimate son. Today will be your last. He stopped short. A look of disbelief crossed his face. As a major general in the military, it was impossible for Samuel to not have recognized him. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, but after seeing the 4 great generals, Dennis, Rosalind, Zachary, and Jaden, standing next to him, he was certain that this familiar face was the one and only Commander-in-Chief. Elric, who was following Samuel from behind, was similarly dumbfounded. Stephen had grown up at the Addams family's mansion, but during his stay, Samuel and Elric had been in the military. When the 3 of them crossed paths in the army, neither of them recognized each other. It was only after the battle with the Alliance, when Stephen and the 4 great generals posted the combat sovereignty rankings, that he realized that Samuel and Elric were from the Addams family. Samuel and Elric looked at each other. Then, they dropped to their knees and greeted Stephen, addressing him as Mr. Addams. Fabian, Merrick, and the other 3 had arrived halfway through and stood in the last row of the Addams family. They squeezed through the crowd and also kneeled in front of Stephen. The 5 of them had been personally selected by the Commander-in-Chief to join the Armored Cavalry Battalion, and although their status had risen, it wasn't to the point where they had a say in family affairs. Their positions in the battalion weren't permanent. They had to pass an examination before becoming official members. Therefore, their words held no weight in the family. They couldn't say anything, even though they knew Stephen's identity. They could only come out and greet Stephen after Samuel and Elric took the lead. With them paving the way, all the soldiers from the Addams family came forward and knelt down. The higher-ups of the Addams family were astonished. Samuel and Elric were kneeling to a person who was much younger than them. They both held important positions in the military, and their names were among the top 5 of the combat sovereignty rankings. Not to mention, they were the top 3, along with Terence of the family. Even Castile was at a loss for words. Just what was Stephen's identity? How was he able to make the strongest of his descendants kneel? Before the Addams family could react, Dennis stepped forward. He motioned to the LeBlanc family and asked them to pay their respects to Stephen as well. The entire LeBlanc family were on their knees in an instant. Their actions opened the eyes of the royal, imperial, and lower-ranking families. They couldn't fall behind. The Lindsay family was the first to kneel. Then it was the Val family, followed by the Naylor family. Thousands of people fell to their knees like waves. It was a sight to behold. It didn't take long for the Beaumont families to be the only ones left standing. Kim and Victoria were also on their feet. They didn't have time to react. What exactly was going on? A howl shook them from their thoughts. A cloud of dust appeared in the restricted area of the mountain. Soldiers in uniforms were riding animals, like wolves, tigers, lions, and other ferocious beasts. They were rushing towards the square. "It's the Fenrir division!" someone exclaimed. Dennis stepped in line and saluted Stephen. Rosalind, Zachary, and Jaden followed his lead. The grand event with the Addams family at the center had become a gathering with Stephen in the spotlight. A group of soldiers walked up to Stephen and knelt down. Then there was a second group and a third. Groups of soldiers rushed over from all directions. They were the squads, collectively known as the 18 Guards, under Stephen's command. The Sky Division with Lennox as the leader was a part of them. The Armored Cavalry Battalion was next to arrive. With their appearance, Stephen's identity was self-explanatory. Just when the upper-class families thought it was over, another group came over. They had only reached the climax. This group was different from the rest. They were dressed in black uniforms with a serpent brandishing its claws on the front. "It's the Leviathan unit!" someone exclaimed. Everyone tensed. The Leviathan unit represented the supreme leader. The leader of the Leviathan unit dropped to one knee and greeted Stephen. The rest of the unit knelt down in unison. Their status was high, but they had to kneel in front of the commander-in-chief. Stephen gave them a smile. "There's no need for formalities." "Thank you, Commander Adams." The leader stood up. "We're here to welcome you to Annapolis on behalf of the Supreme Leader." Kim and Victoria were bewildered as they watched the crowd around them kneel one after another. Victoria was at a loss when Dennis, Rosalind, Zachary, and Jaden got on one knee beside her. She stood out like a sore thumb. "What's going on?" Kim whispered. Urim and Keen shook their heads mechanically. They didn't know either. Kylan, his 4 students, and his troops were the next to arrive. His students, Kingsley, Arlett, Raksha, and Constant, knelt in front of Stephen and introduced themselves, followed by the rest of his troops. They were the top warriors of the United States military, and they were comparable to Stephen's troops. Each of them had the ability to fight against tens of thousands of enemies. They wouldn't back down even if they were up against 1,000,000 opponents. Kylan walked up to Stephen and greeted him respectfully. Although he didn't agree with Stephen being the commander-in-chief, there were formalities that he had to fulfill whenever they met. However, because there was only 1 tier difference between their ranks, there was no need for him to kneel. Despite the unfamiliar titles all around, there was no one in Annapolis who hadn't heard of General Kylan. He was one of the few who was stronger than the 4 great generals. At this point, Stephen's identity was as clear as day. He was the person who had turned the tide 6 years ago and saved the country. Castile was the first among the higher-ups to come to his senses. His defeat suddenly made sense. Stephen was the divine weapon of the United States, an existence who held his own against 20 grandmasters from the Alliance. Castile had advanced to a martial Grand Master, but he would never be able to win against the Commander-in-Chief. There were rumors that he'd reached the divine Grand Master realm. The head of the Phoenix family had never been so shocked in his entire life. Only now did he understand why Mansell had chosen to let it go after having his arm broken. He didn't want any kind of revenge, because the person who'd provoked him was the commander-in-chief. The Phoenix family didn't have the qualifications to go against the commander, not even if there were 10 of them. Urim was just as shocked. Thinking back, Derek had wanted to cancel his engagement with Kim, even if it had meant offending the Cassidy family. Stephen hadn't pulled any tricks. It was because Derek had found out his identity. He wouldn't dare to snatch the commander-in-chief's wife, not even if he had 9 lives. Stephen's bold and arrogant actions in the past made sense. As the commander-in-chief, the Addams family was nothing in his eyes. As for Keen, his mind was racing in a panic, because just yesterday, when Stephen came to visit the Cassidy family, he'd acted on his own accord and told the commander-in-chief to kneel before him if he wanted to enter. The Cassidy family was far from being qualified to receive the commander's respect. Valeria, who was bundled in Kim's arms, waved her tiny hands in Stephen's direction. Kim had been trying to process the unbelievable facts thrown at her. She snapped out of her daze at the sound of Valeria's voice. She was calling for her daddy, but none of that registered. All she was thinking was, Stephen is the commander-in-chief, and the commander-in-chief is my husband. The events of the past replayed in Kim's mind like a movie. She thought of the difficult and complicated situations she'd encountered over the past year. They were gradually resolved with no loose ends. It wasn't that obvious during the first 3 years of their marriage, but after that one annual meeting with the Cassidy family, the hints kept coming. All the signs were there. She could only blame herself for being dense. If Stephen knew what Kim was thinking, he would tell her that she was an ordinary person. She saw the world through the lens of the ordinary. It didn't make sense for her to link her husband's identity with the divine weapon of the nation. Victoria was also replaying their conversations from the past. She'd often thought that Stephen was just trying to reassure her, but he'd meant every word. As the commander-in-chief, it was a given that he was strong enough to challenge the Addams family. And he wasn't just doing it for himself. He was doing it for her. The LeBlanc family shouted at the Addams family. What are you all waiting for? You need to pay your respects to Commander Addams. They had already submitted to Dennis, who was one of the 4 great generals under the commander. They brimmed with confidence. None of them were afraid of the Addams family anymore. Is he really the commander-in-chief? Terrence asked doubtfully. More than 10,000 people had kneeled before Stephen. That should have been proof enough, but he still couldn't believe it. Of course he is. Take a good look around you. You're the only one who doesn't know what's going on. Terrence had wondered why so many upper-class families had shown up today. He'd thought that they were here for Castile, but that couldn't have been further from the truth. They were here for the commander-in-chief. He recalled Stephen's daring attitude when he saw him in Washington, D.C. He didn't think too much of it at the time and brushed it off as he was before ignorant of the real world. In reality, Stephen wasn't fearless because he didn't know anything. It was because he'd never been afraid of the Addams family. Terrence thought of the bet and how Stephen had warned him to make preparations. Now he understood why. The head of the Addams family's branch in Asheville, Mateo, had called him and told him that nothing good would come out of provoking Stephen. Terrence hadn't taken his warning to heart. Thinking about it now, Mateo probably already knew Stephen's identity when he called. It was laughable. The commander-in-chief had spent so much manpower and resources to search for his son all along. He'd even tried to force him to his death multiple times before. How would things have changed if he'd acknowledged Stephen from the beginning? No matter how talented Johan was, he could never be compared to Stephen. Terrence suddenly thought of his first meeting with Stephen in the district. He'd thought that Victoria had spilled his secret to her son, but that probably wasn't the case. It would be a piece of cake for the commander-in-chief to investigate his dark history. As for using his secret to threaten him, it was never necessary. It was ridiculous that he and the Addams family had always regarded Stephen as arrogant and ignorant of the world. Without them knowing, he'd already achieved much more than what they would ever accomplish. I finally understand, the head of the Phoenix family said. The Addams family attempted to hunt Stephen down 6 years ago, but they never succeeded. I thought it was because they spared him because of his bloodline, but it was because he became the commander-in-chief without their knowledge. One of the royal leaders mocked him. And you thought his greatest achievement was the Wyvern Group. It's an insignificant business compared to his identity as the commander-in-chief. The higher-ups of the Addams family seethed with anger as they listened to their conversation. They glared at Terrence. If he hadn't made things difficult for Victoria, kicked Stephen out of the family, and sent assassins after him, none of this would have happened. Johann had even crashed his wedding with Kim. If it weren't for them, the Addams family would have had the commander-in-chief in charge. Their prosperity would have lasted for the next 500 years. They would have been able to gain a foothold overseas and compete with the top families around the world. Their opportunity was long gone. It was Terrence who had turned Stephen into an enemy. All right, that's enough, Stephen said. All of you, get up. A crowd of more than 10,000 stood up. The scene was just as incredible as when they kneeled. Stephen went over to Victoria. Mom, please follow me. Victoria nodded in anticipation. She knew that the moment he'd promised her was finally coming. He led her to the higher-ups of the Addams family. His gaze fell on Terrence. Aside from fulfilling my end of the bet, I'm here because of my mother. You once told me that the only way I would gain the right to speak to you is by fighting my way into the family. Now I would like to ask you if that is necessary. Terrence fell silent. Each word stabbed his heart like a knife. His illegitimate son, who he'd always regarded as trash, had become an existence he'd unknowingly looked up to for a long time. Stephen held Victoria's hand and led her in front of Terrence. He looked him in the eye. Fighting my way in is a simple task. I brought my mother here because I want an explanation from you. The Addams and Phoenix families knew exactly what he meant by explanation. Terrence shook from the pressure of Stephen's powerful aura. His voice trembled. What explanation? Stephen shot him a glare before unleashing an aura that was much more intense than before. The higher-ups' knees went weak. The pressure made it difficult for them to breathe. Some of them couldn't withstand his aura and fell to their knees. What's wrong? We've already gotten to this point. Do you still want to play dumb? Since you're feigning ignorance, then I'll be upfront with you. Back when you claimed to have fallen in love with my mother, she knelt in front of the Addams family residence for 3 days and 3 nights to convince them to let her keep her child. She was pregnant with me at the time, and she suffered a great deal. What I want to know is, where were you? Didn't you care about her? Terrence lowered his gaze, but he didn't respond. I'll ask you another question. Why was it so easy for you to abandon us? Terrence opened his mouth, but the words didn't come out. Stephen's aura was growing stronger by the minute. When Laurel conspired with the fortune teller to give me a reading that predicted that I was bad luck and that I would cause the family's ruin, you believed their lies and chased me out. You even wanted to kill me. What did I do wrong to deserve that? And what did my mother do to deserve the 2 decades of imprisonment? You despised us so much that you wanted to erase us from existence. Stephen's words were like a clap of thunder to the higher-ups. His gaze swept over them. They all had lowered their heads. None of them dared to look him in the eye. What's wrong? I've said my piece. Now it's your turn. Terrence's mind went blank. He didn't answer. Stephen turned away and kicked the entrance to the mansion. The majestic door was shattered with a bang. The broken pieces scattered in all directions, showering the higher-ups in dust and rubble. No one said a word. This was the first time in hundreds of years that their door had been broken by a kick. The pressure intensified. The Addams family couldn't take it anymore and dropped to their knees. Terrence couldn't help but kneel with them. Laurel and the Phoenix family followed suit. No one had an explanation that could satisfy Stephen. If they had known what would happen today, they would have never chosen Johann over him. With an existence like the commander-in-chief, why would they need Johann? He would have been in charge of the family if they had made a different decision. Castile kneeled in front of Stephen with an expression of regret and indignation. Mr. Addams, I'll atone for their crimes on behalf of the family." He was close to being 10 times older than Stephen, but no one thought it was inappropriate for him to kneel. This was a world where strength was respected. If you were strong enough, you could make anyone kneel before you. To the other Beaumont families, they attributed the Addams family's current status to their hard work and effort over the span of several generations. It hadn't been easy for them to get to the top. They'd been around for 1,000 years. Everyone thought their positions would be unshakable for all time. No one had expected that this day would come. The Addams family, who had sat firmly on the throne of ranked first in the country for hundreds of years, had been defeated. Stephen had suppressed them by himself. His existence was simply terrifying. Victoria suddenly burst into laughter. She never thought that a moment like this would come. She walked over to Laurel, who was on her knees. "Do you still remember what you told me?" Laurel didn't answer. "You don't remember? Well, I haven't forgotten. You told me that my son's bloodline was inferior and that he was worthless. What about now? You're kneeling in front of him." Laurel wanted to refute it, but she didn't have the words. Victoria walked up to Terence. "Raise your head, Terence. Don't you find this laughable?" Like Laurel, he didn't say anything. Victoria stepped back and faced the entire Addams family. "All of you listen carefully. Back then, you rejected me because you weren't satisfied with my background. You told me that I was a member of a lowly royal family and that I'm not worthy of joining you. After my son was born, you abandoned him in every way possible. He almost died. Fortunately, he survived and became the commander-in-chief. Do you still think his background is inferior? Do you still think he doesn't deserve the bloodline of the Addams family? Each and every one of you who looked down on my son is looking up at him now." Her voice rang loud and clear. The Addams family had held their breaths as she spoke. Stephen knew that Victoria had suffered for the past few decades. He didn't interrupt her while she vented her pent-up anger in her heart. When she was finished, Stephen looked at Castile. "Atonement? What you and your family did to us is irreversible. How could you possibly atone for your crimes?" Castile didn't respond. He didn't have an answer. With Stephen's current status and influence, there was nothing they had that he didn't. "All right, I'll give some of you some time to think. As for me, I have something important to take care of right now." Everyone looked up at Stephen. What could be more important than confronting the Addams family? Stephen walked over to Kim. "Remember what I told you, Kim? I promised that I'd explain everything after visiting the Addams family." Kim nodded. "I remember." "I'll tell you everything. Actually, I planned to tell you during our wedding, but Johan showed up unexpectedly and ruined my plans. After that, I thought about finding an appropriate opportunity, but the Addams family kept trying to get in the way. You were pregnant at the time, so I agreed to the 1-year bet so that I could take care of you in peace. At first, I thought there wouldn't be anything to worry about. You would safely give birth, and then I'd confront the Addams family and reveal my identity. Unfortunately, that was when the Alliance conspired with Devil Hall and attacked the western border. I received the highest order from the Supreme Leader to set off for the border with my troops. Time was of the essence, and I didn't have the courage to say goodbye to you." Everyone present finally understood why Stephen had suddenly disappeared at an important time. They thought that he'd run away because the deadline of the bet was approaching, but he'd gone to the battlefield and risked his life to fight against Devil Hall. Tears welled up in Kim's eyes. "That's why you weren't here when I was due, and when the deadline of the bet was up. That's why everyone called you a coward." Stephen let out a sigh. "Yes, I know the past year has been hard on you." Kim shook her head. "That was nothing compared to what you went through." All of Kim's unanswered questions had finally been clarified. The answer had been right in front of her all along. Her husband wasn't a coward. Stephen hadn't run away. He hadn't abandoned his family. He was the commander-in-chief. "The reason the Alliance plotted with Devil Hall was that they wanted to lure me to the border away from you and Mom," Stephen explained. They were looking for an opportunity to get to you two. Kim hadn't realized that she and Victoria were in that much danger. I don't remember anything out of the ordinary happening. That's because the Supreme Leader sent someone to protect you and Mom, so I wouldn't have to worry. Stephen gestured to Kylan and his students. General Kylan has been protecting you in secret ever since you arrived in Warhawk. His 4 students, Kingsley, Ariat, Raksha, and Constant, have been protecting Mom. When your plane landed in Warhawk, there were more than 10,000 people from the Alliance lying in ambush at the airport, Kingsley chimed in. They were planning to take you away the moment you stepped out. It was my teacher, General Kylan, who showed up and intimidated them to ensure your safety. Kylan had never agreed to Stephen being the commander-in-chief. Kingsley couldn't pass up on an opportunity to brag about his teacher. I see, Kim said. Everything made sense now. Kylan had saved her twice, although she hadn't been aware of it at the airport. The second time was more obvious. When she and Victoria were in danger during the confrontation with the Addams family, Kylan stepped in and saved them. She'd been wondering about his motives. It turned out that it was because of Stephen. You've been hiding so much from me. Sorry, Kim, Stephen said. His tone was riddled with guilt. Despite everything, it's true that I left without a word. I let you and our daughter down. I wasn't a good husband or a good father. But that won't happen again. Your husband is the commander-in-chief, and you are the commander's wife. This is the explanation that I wanted to give you today. You don't have to feel guilty. You did what you had to do. Thank you for explaining yourself properly. I'm very proud of you, Stephen. Kim put Valeria in his arms. This is our daughter, Valeria. Valeria smiled up at Stephen while mumbling incoherently. Did you hear that, Kim? Stephen asked excitedly. She's calling me Daddy. Valeria was still young, and her voice wasn't that clear, but he could tell that she was calling him her father. Urim was moved. Mr. Adams, I apologize for being blind. For the past 6 months, you've been risking your life for the safety of the people. Mr. Adams, I'm very sorry for being rude to you yesterday, Keen said hurriedly. Stephen was amused by Keen's complete change in attitude. His domineering self from yesterday was gone. Offending the commander is treason. I could have you executed for that. Stephen laughed at the horrified look on Keen's face. I'm just kidding. You and your father have been taking good care of Kim and my mother while I was away. Your apology was sincere, and that's enough for me. We're even. Thank you, Mr. Adams, Keen said in relief. The other families were envious of their exchange. Stephen may have reprimanded Keen on the surface, but the Cassidy family's relationship with the commander-in-chief had improved significantly. Moreover, the commander's wife was Yoram's adoptive daughter. That made her Keen's younger sister. Several families were filled with regret. Why didn't they have Yoram's foresight back then? Stephen went back to the higher-ups of the Addams family. I've settled what I came here to do. So have you decided? How do you plan on atoning for their crimes? Castile didn't have an answer. He could give the entire family to Stephen, but he was the commander-in-chief, an existence who stood above everyone else. That wouldn't be enough. The Addams family was known as the #1 family in the country, but that was relative to the United States. Their status wasn't worth mentioning overseas. If you can't think of anything, then I'll make the decision for you. If that's what you want, Mr. Adams, Castile said. When my mother was pregnant, you made her kneel outside for 3 days and 3 nights in the heavy rain. Starting now, all of you will kneel for the same amount of time. It doesn't matter whether the sun is scorching or if there's a storm. The higher-ups looked at each other. This was their karma. We'll follow your instructions, Castile said with a sigh. The rest of the higher-ups couldn't refute now that Castile had spoken. Not that they were capable of going against Stephen in the first place. As for you, Terrence, what you did to me and my mother is unforgivable. I was on the brink of death multiple times because of you. Kneeling for 3 days and 3 nights is too light of a punishment. Terrence's heart raced in a panic. He couldn't recall ever being this nervous before. As the head of the Addams family, It was rare for him to be nervous at all. You don't have to kneel like the rest of them, but you have to repent in another way. Take one punch from me. I don't know how serious it'll be. Whether you live or die, it'll defend fate. Consider our grudge resolved after this. After Stephen's performance, it was obvious that he had most likely passed the martial grandmaster realm. Terence had no idea what to expect from one of his punches. Even so, he stood up and faced Stephen. This is the best outcome. I accept. Are you ready? Terence took a deep breath and braced himself. Come on. Okay, Stephen said. Then he threw out a fist aimed at his abdomen. Terence had only just processed his voice before he was sent flying across the square. He crashed into the wall of the mansion. The bricks shattered and kicked up a cloud of dust. Terence had disappeared among the rubble. No one knew if he was dead or alive. Not only was Terence the head of the family, but he was also part of the top 3 strongest members. But even he couldn't withstand a single punch from Stephen. The higher-ups followed Castile's lead. They straightened and knelt properly. They would kneel for 3 days and 3 nights according to Stephen's instructions. This would be atonement for their crimes. Stephen could have ruined the Addams family beyond repair, but their businesses were extensive. They touched on every aspect of daily life. Looking at their situation from another perspective, it would be better to leave them alone. At this time, overseas, there was a large projector in the Alliance's conference room. It was broadcasting the scene of Stephen confronting the Addams family. That was impressive. He killed the successor of the #1 Beaumont family in the United States. That doesn't mean anything. He was just a successor. It's more impressive that the Addams and Phoenix families had 100 Grand Masters on their side. That's comparable to our army. Everyone sighed. 6 years ago, they had only managed to find 20 Grand Masters. That's not as impressive as when the commander-in-chief took down all 100 of them. This is crazy. Just what realm has he reached? The martial Grand Master realm? Or is it the legendary divine Grand Master realm? Silence filled the room. If the commander-in-chief really had reached the divine Grand Master realm, he would be an invincible powerhouse of the United States. That would spell disaster for the Alliance. Silas laughed when their discussion took a ridiculous turn. Divine Grand Master realm? Everyone, don't you think you're getting ahead of yourself? No matter how strong the commander-in-chief is, that's not a realm just anyone can reach. The higher-ups exchanged glances. Perhaps they had overestimated the commander-in-chief. They hadn't heard of anyone who had reached the divine Grand Master realm. Someone countered Silas's argument. That may be true, but with the commander-in-chief's current skill in martial arts, who among us can match up to him? First, he defeated the pillar of the Addams family, Castile Addams. Next, he'd killed their successor, Johann Addams, with a single strike. Then, he won against 100 Grand Masters. Not even the strongest martial arts experts in the Alliance would be capable of that. Everyone's mood soured. There was no one in the world who could fight head-on with the commander-in-chief. Silas didn't get angry. That's a good question. We are not enough to take him down, but that doesn't mean we're out of options. To deal with the commander-in-chief, we'll need to think outside the box to come up with the best strategy. The higher-ups recalled what Silas had mentioned during their previous meeting. Are you referring to... That's right. Right before the commander-in-chief killed the left envoy of light, he stabbed the commander with a poisoned dagger. Yesterday, he fought Castile. Today, he went through a series of battles with the successor and the Grand Master. The level of exertion required would have consumed quite a bit of his inner energy. That would have given the poison the opportunity to invade his organs. This poison was specifically developed for martial arts experts with profound inner energy. See, it's already taking effect. Silas pointed at the projector. The higher-ups turned their attention to the display. On the screen, Stephen was standing in front of tens of thousands of people. Just as he was about to make his next move, he stumbled and almost fell over. Stephen cursed when his vision suddenly went black and a wave of dizziness washed over him. Fortunately, he reacted in time and circulated his energy to hide his condition. It was growing increasingly difficult for him to suppress the poison. The first time the poison showed its effects was when Derek shoved him lightly. The second time was after his fight with Castile. He'd managed to suppress the poison both times. But this was different. Stephen could feel that the poison's effects were much stronger. It must have been because of the Grand Masters. There had been 100 of them, and he'd been forced to use more of his energy than usual. Everyone in the conference room saw the video on the projector. "Did everyone see that?" Silas asked in the conference room. "The poison is working. It doesn't matter how sturdy or resilient his body is. He had to fight 100 Grandmasters at the same time. That was enough for the poison to exert its effects." The higher-ups of the Alliance stared at the screen. Many of them weren't proficient in martial arts, so they couldn't detect anything unusual from the Commander-in-Chief. But those who were more advanced in martial arts noticed the abnormalities. They gave Silas a thumbs up. "Your plan is brilliant. When the poison becomes too much for the Commander-in-Chief, that's when we'll—" "No, that'll take too long. He may have been poisoned, but his strength is undeniable. In the time it takes us to send our people over, it'll be too late. I'll give him the time he needs to recover." "Then when should we make our move?" "We don't have to do anything. The Commander-in-Chief has expended a lot of energy during his battle with the Addams family. The inside of his body is most likely severely injured from the poison, and at this opportune time, General Kylan will step up and finish the job." As Silas spoke, he looked at the screen. "He's been waiting for a duel with the commander for many years. Now that the commander's family affairs are dealt with, he'll come forward and ask for a duel. All we need to do is sit back, watch how it plays out, and reap the benefits. It's pointless for us to charge in and end up as cannon fodder." Sure enough, as soon as he finished explaining, Kylan came into view on the screen. He walked straight to Stephen. "Commander Addams, has the grudge between you and the Addams family been resolved?" Stephen could tell where he was going with this. "Yes." "Do you have any other personal matters to attend to?" "No. Everything's been taken care of." "In that case, it's time for you to own up to your words. You accepted my request for a duel. Now's the time." Stephen didn't answer him right away. He assessed the condition of his body. He was using every last bit of inner energy to prevent the poison from spreading. This was anything but an ideal time to have their duel. As the Commander-in-Chief, admitting defeat without a fight or asking to reschedule would raise questions overseas and bring about a negative wave of public opinion. But if he were to reveal that he was poisoned, the forces overseas would retaliate even stronger than before. In addition, the people of the United States had long since regarded the commander as their guardian. If anything happened to him, panic and chaos would ensue. That left Stephen with only one option. Kylan noticed that something was off about him. His rank as a general was only second to the Commander-in-Chief. He could tell that something wasn't right from the look on Stephen's face. "Commander Addams, are you not feeling well? If you don't think this is an appropriate time, we can reschedule." The higher-ups of the Alliance looked at each other in concern when they heard what Kylan said. "Mr. Silas, if the commander agrees to change the date of the duel, what should we do? That would give him enough time to suppress the poison. It'll be difficult to come across another opportunity like this." "Don't worry. Given the circumstances, the commander will agree to General Kylan's challenge." The island state was located close to the United States. They had been learning from them for a long time, and they were aware of the foundation that their country was built on. As Silas predicted, Stephen didn't refuse. "No, I'm fine. Many people across the country have been looking forward to our duel. Naturally, the same goes for me." Regardless of whether the commander wins or loses, their battle will consume a large amount of his inner energy. The left envoy of light sacrificed his life to poison him. It's not an ordinary poison. If it were anyone else but the commander, they would have died already. After their battle, the poison will spread throughout his body. Even if he doesn't die, he'll be incapacitated. "Are our informants already hiding near the Addams family's mansion?" someone asked. "Of course," Silas said confidently. This was his plan. He wouldn't make a mistake. The Alliance's spies were hiding in the shadows not too far away from the square. They weren't your ordinary martial artists. Many of them had trained using unorthodox methods. If Silas had sent martial arts experts, they would have been easily detected. That wasn't the case for these spies. Their auras were weak. Even martial grandmasters would think them as normal people. The spies paid close attention to the situation at the square. Those who were experienced with poisons could sense that the poison had already spread throughout Stephen's body. His death was guaranteed. Kylan extended his hand towards the center of the square in an inviting gesture. In that case, let's begin. He had chosen to fight with Stephen after he fought Johann and the Grand Masters because it shouldn't have required that much effort. He could have accomplished the same thing without breaking a sweat. He and Stephen were of similar strengths, so he knew that it hadn't been a tough battle. The crowd got excited. With their status, it was already an honor to share the same space as the Commander-in-Chief and General Kylan. They even had front-row seats to their duel. This was a decisive battle that would determine whether Stephen would remain the Commander-in-Chief or if Kylan would take over the position. If Stephen won, Kylan and his troops would be under his command. He would be even more powerful than he is now. If Kylan won, he would become the new Commander-in-Chief and establish his status as the strongest among the two of them. I've been living in your shadow for the past 6 years, Kylan said. Everyone says that the Commander-in-Chief can ensure the country's peace and prosperity, and that there's never been anyone like you. I'm ranked second, but I don't have much of a reputation among the people. Everyone knows about you, but no one knows about me. Today, I'm going to rectify my reputation and show the world that I'm not inferior to you. Stephen had been rejecting Kylan's request for a duel for many years. Now that the two of them were standing here, he was filled with a competitive spirit. We'll know after the duel. If you lose, you'll be under my command. If you win, the position of the Commander-in-Chief will be yours. It's always been mine. You got lucky 6 years ago. Today, I'll be taking back what rightfully belongs to me. Kylan's position as a general was only second to the Commander-in-Chief. It was considered high up the ranks, but for those who tread on the path of martial arts, there was no such thing as second place. You were either at the top or you weren't. If he defeated Stephen in a duel, it would prove that he deserved the title of the Commander-in-Chief. While they were talking, the four great generals sensed that something was unusual about Stephen. They'd been a team for many years, and they were as close as family. I think Mr. Adams has sustained an injury, Dennis said worriedly. He looks like he's trying to suppress something. Rosalind nodded. I noticed it too. He might have been poisoned. For a poison to affect him, it can't be a normal one. It may have been during the fight with the left envoy of light, Jaden said. Thinking back, the situation back then was strange. They had been surrounded by puppets. The left envoy had enough time to escape, but he didn't. Instead, he fought with Stephen head-on. He must have laced his dagger with poison. What should we do? Zachary asked in concern. He's about to duel with General Kylan. There's no time for us to do something about that poison. What if I fought him instead? Among the four great generals, Zachary's martial arts were the most advanced. He was confident that he'd be able to take Kylan on. Dennis shook his head. You can't do that. There are more than 10,000 people present. They're all from prestigious families in Annapolis. The entire country has their eyes on their duel. What would they think if you took Mr. Adams' place? But there are no buts. Now that things have gotten to this point, we can only wait for the right opportunity. Mr. Adams is probably aware of this as well. Dennis was the leader of the four great generals for a reason. He was level-headed and could analyze the situation with the big picture in mind. Stephen had to have known about his condition better than anyone. He had accepted Kylan's challenge because he didn't have a chance. Stephen circulated his energy and suppressed the poison again. It was only a temporary solution. Once the battle began, the poison would spread further. Kylan moved first. He closed in on Stephen at a speed that most of the crowd couldn't see clearly. Before they realized it, Kylan and Stephen had exchanged the first blow. Their palms collided, and a wave of energy spread through the area. Those who were caught in the crossfire were sent tumbling back. The 2 stone lions that had been squatting in front of the Addams family's gate for over 1,000 years exploded, turning into dust and rubble.